The following is an excerpt, and one I think is going to be helpful for this quick discussion about war with Grace Lee Boggs, Imagine Everything. Here's the excerpt. How do we rebuild? How do we redefine? How do we respirit our communities and one another? We can't expect Obama or Mitt Romney to abolish the war in Afghanistan. They have put us in those wars. They have created the crises. They are not going to solve it. We're the ones who have to solve it by creating another kind of society and by taking advantage of their helplessness and their powerlessness to do it. When Grace is discussing helplessness, I think she's referring to the fact that the president, or at the time these guys were likely running for office against each other, because remember there was Mitt Romney against Barack Obama, and Barack Obama got in the second term. And I think what she's saying is that their helplessness has more to do with Congress, because the president is just a figurehead, and their powerlessness as well. Though they could speak out on these issues, it doesn't mean they can necessarily stop the wars. But here's the thing, though. I'm going to overreach with this excerpt, because her mentioning of Afghanistan is very telling, given that Grace had by this time had to been in her 90s, which means she was close to a century, because we all know she died, if you looked her up, shortly after turning 100 years old. So she lived for a full century. That gave her enough time to live through enough wars to probably see parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan. Because if we can have an honest conversation from a standpoint of the United States, Vietnam was a dismal failure. And we're not going to move forward until we can accept that we were never going to conquer Vietnam. Yet I've had stories from Vietnam vets who returned home who could not tell people they served in Vietnam because they were treated as scum. This is a true story. And when you go back into the history of our two races, right, you have people like Muhammad Ali stating that I'm not going to go fight for a country that treats me as less than a citizen. And I don't have any problem with any Viet Cong. And if you're in the black community, you can recall, because these are stories I heard in Alabama as a little girl, where black soldiers were coming back from the world wars, and them being in uniform was not enough to save them because they were still being lynched. So Muhammad Ali led the charge. Why the heck are we giving a crap about wars for a country that doesn't treat us as full citizens? Which he died on that hill and lost his boxing career temporarily, and then made an epic comeback some years before he passed away. Mike Nikiyama, I don't know much about other than the fact that he served in the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam. But the reason that Mike is here, and I use him as an example, is because he's an example of someone who physically went to Vietnam and can pretty much tell you that it was not the success that we think it was. And I invite you to go look him up. Muhammad Ali is the most well-known of the two. But I invite you guys, because I'm not going to tell you everything, to go and research Mike Nikiyama, if I'm saying his name correct. If I'm not, he can find me and correct me. See, here's the thing about wars and what I think Grace wanted us to get from that. And again, this is me overreaching, but I use this as a hypothetical. Even when you go back to the two world wars, the United States wanted no involvement. Past the Spanish-American War, really, the United States had a anti-war type of sentiment that only ramped up during Vietnam. We really wanted no part of what happened in Europe, because the national sentiment was, since we got freed from Great Britain, who colonized us for like a couple of centuries, why would we then go and enter Europe's useless wars? Because you have to remember the Eurocentric mindset of the United States, in which European settlers settled here, and therefore that mindset of war came with them, because European countries had no problem with war. Now, let's be honest. If you go look into other civilizations around the world, all of those civilizations based on race fought each other as well. But the general consensus is that war should be avoided at all times. What I think Grace recognized, as well as the rest of us, by the time Afghanistan rolled around, is that war had become so profitable, it's hard for people in power who are getting their money from it to outright reject it. And that's what she means by respirit our communities, because that is the monster that had so much gotten out of hand that we could no longer control it or do anything about it. By creating another kind of society is also meaning to create another way of thinking. Go do your research. This was just a quick rant. Go do your research. Typically, when you get to the early 20th century, even up until now in general, besides Iraqi freedom, because of what happened September 11th, and we won't go into that, the United States was in general anti-war. Just go look at all the anti-Vietnam protests on college campuses. Go look at all of the old footage and documentaries. And yet when all of the people came back, they were all mistreated. And Iraqi freedom gave us the ability to heal those wrongs, but it did not help Vietnam vets. And looking back in the black community, at that time, most of us have the consensus that Muhammad Ali did the right thing. He would have come home as a pariah in a war that he didn't ever want to get drafted in. Well, all right. Let me know what you think about that excerpt, what I may or may not have taken out of context, what I could have added to it. Thanks. Have a great day.